happiness is a serious problem. No, seriously. Look around today and you will see that it sort of is. And now I've strayed away a little bit into a more philosophical realm with the books that I'm reading at the moment, but I think this book, Happiness is a Serious Problem by Dennis Prager, is great, especially considering the current climate. And if this topic is something you're interested in, or if this is something you struggle with, then I would definitely check it out. It's a really quick read with some great summaries. You can pick it up and put it down in 5 minutes. It takes a deep dive into happiness and some of the obstacles that stand in the way of our happiness, which most of the time happens to be us, unfortunately. But that also means that we have a big role in the production of our happiness. But most of the time we don't stop to ask ourselves, will this make me happier? Most of the time we just do what feels good, like eating the whole tub of Ben & Jerry's because that's what we feel like doing, even though it contradicts our long-term happiness and goals. That's why we always say, I don't feel happy. Prager says, I try to be happy unless something happens that makes me unhappy, rather than being unhappy unless something makes me happy. Just take that in for a moment. This is really important. Have you ever thought about happiness this way? Like, are you constantly unhappy just because you're waiting for something to make you happy? I had never thought about this, but it's something we do a lot. We wait for something to make us happy instead of simply being happy. But happiness is not easy. Prager says everything worthwhile in life is attained through hard work, and happiness is not an exception. And this sort of takes away the magic, so to speak, of happiness. But if you start to think about it, it makes happiness and joy so much more fulfilling. It also means that we have to work for it. And luckily, there are a few places we can start. We like to self-sabotage our own happiness. I don't know why, but one way we do this is by focusing on whatever is flawed or missing within our lives, no matter how beautiful our lives might be. This is commonly referred to as the missing tile syndrome, and I found it really fascinating. So to paint the picture here, imagine you are standing under a beautiful ceiling, and you look up and you see that there is a tile missing. And once you see that missing tile, that's probably all you'll concentrate on. Prager points out that the more beautiful the ceiling, the more likely you're going to be fixated on that missing tile. So this is what we do with our lives sometimes, right? I'm sure we can all think of something that we think, if I just had that one thing, I'd be happy. This is what's missing. I'll be the first to admit that I'm guilty of this. I've definitely done it before. The difference, though, between the ceiling analogy is that ceilings can be perfect, but life can't be. In our lives, no matter how hard we try, there will always be some tiles missing, or we'll imagine that there are. We can always imagine a more perfect life. Prager tells this great story about when he was dating, or trying to date. He was always wondering what the most important quality of a woman was. So after every date, it was something different. After one date, it was personality. After another, it was intelligence, good values, and so on. Well, one day, he called his friend and said, I figured it out. I know what the most important trait is. And his friend says, stop. I already know what it is. Prager's a bit confused and says, how is that possible? You don't even know who I went out with. And his friend replied, it doesn't matter. You're about to tell me that the most important trait is whatever trait tonight's date didn't have. This story is the missing tile syndrome. And the point of all of this is that we have to teach ourselves to focus on what we do have. Always focusing on and looking for missing tiles only leads to unhappiness. But what do we do about it though? We have to determine what our missing tile is and decide whether or not finding that missing tile will really make us happy. Prager says we can get it, forget it, or replace it. If it is something you can attain, then go for it. But if the missing tile cannot be found, then you need to let it go and focus on the good things you do have. If possible, you can try to replace it with something else. I thought this was really helpful, and once I acknowledged that I was doing this in some ways, it was so much easier to focus on the good things in life. And we are oftentimes the problem with our own happiness, as I mentioned earlier, and maybe without even realizing it. Victimhood is another way in which we reduce our own happiness. And I want to preface this that Prager makes it very clear, and I agree, that there are true victims in life, but he is really assessing the relationship between happiness and those who decide to see themselves as victims. There is joy in victimhood. It's easy. It's really easy to not take responsibility for your own happiness, and self-pity can be addicting. When you see yourself as a victim, you don't see yourself as in control of your own life. You cannot allow yourself to enjoy life because you see yourself as a victim, and to be happy would to be to change your perception of yourself, and then you're rendered unhappy. So placing yourself in the role of a victim when you truly aren't, that makes happiness very hard. And the truth is, there's little correlation between the circumstances of people's lives and how happy they are. This is because, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but we determine how much something makes us unhappy. We can choose to be unbothered by things, which to me really seems like a superpower. This is hard and not for the faint of heart, but I've seen this so personally in my life. It's easy to complain, to be wounded or annoyed, but it achieves nothing good. If something goes wrong at work or if someone is mean to me, I can pick whether or not I let that ruin my day, right? Or, I can move on from it and learn from it and choose to be self-aware and say, okay, that was unfortunate. I didn't enjoy that. That bothered me. And then be mature enough to let it go. And by removing myself from my own pity party, I'm much more likely to grow. And Prager says that if you value growth, you'll value virtually every situation. But this doesn't mean that everything always works out for the best. But it does mean that positive things can be discovered, and ultimately you'll be a happier person because of it. This is something that I'm working on. And, victimhood in this sense is more like when someone cuts you off on your way to work and it just ruins the rest of your day. But if it ruins the rest of your day, it's because you're choosing to let it, because you can also choose to let it go. Happiness takes self-control, and it seems like an oxymoron, but self-control leads to freedom. And Prager describes freedom as the ability to do what brings you happiness, and while many of us think that freedom means doing whatever you want, he says otherwise. He gives the example of an addict, and this made it very clear for me. Addicts do whatever they want, but they're the least free people. The only way to ultimately get what you want is by denying yourself short-term pleasures that interfere with your long-term goal. So like eating that Ben & Jerry's if your long-term goal is to be healthy. If you struggle with happiness, this book is definitely great to check out, and drop your comments on your thoughts about this book. And, as always, follow the hashtag #TheSpinalTap if you'd like to check out some more of my book reviews. And until next time, happy reading.